Talk accountability and self-discipline. Oh, your favorite subject, Tom.
Oh, yeah, I live for this.
Well, let's get started recording our podcast like we usually do. So, for those of you just joining us on the live stream side of things, we record our podcast Future Brand live and we cover a brand new topic. And if you were one of our coaching clients and one of our poditized clients in general, you'd be over on Zoom, able to ask questions and chat with us. And after we jump out of the live stream, we close out, we're going straight over there to answer questions on anything podcasting.
All right. You starting or am I?
Does not matter.
Okay. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Feed Your Brand. I'm Tom Hazzard along with my co-host, Tracy. Today, we're going to talk about mastering podcast momentum, overcoming accountability, and discipline hurdles.
Your favorite subject.
Yeah, maybe not so much. But this subject, I mean, it is a very good one. And boy, do I have these hurdles to overcome myself. This is why it isn't my favorite subject, because it holds up a mirror to what I am challenged with. So I do fully admit I need support for certain things to be able to show up. Like, I can tell you, not only because we're recording this podcast, we do it at the same time every week. That's great. It's on my calendar. I know I'm going to show up. And even recording another podcast, especially, I was actually, believe it or not, co-host on a show that ran for a couple of years where I was the more organized of the two hosts.
I'm really frightened right now.
It really is. If we didn't have that session recurring booked on our calendar, the time when we were going to do it every week, it probably wouldn't have happened. And I actually don't recommend most podcasters do that. When you and I, Tracy, our very first podcast, we would take one whole day a month and binge record all our episodes in one day, sometimes in 2 days, depends on which show we were doing, because we were publishing a lot of episodes really frequently. But if we didn't set aside those times, it wouldn't happen. But we would binge record in, one day, an awful lot of episodes. And that's what I think most podcasters in business are best served to do.
But that would have never worked for you.
No.
Because even to set aside that one day would have never worked for you if you did not have an accountability partner with a great amount of self-discipline who would organize all of that, right? That's kind of how it works. So I want to talk about this topic and frame it up for us. Our good friends over at PodPros, Alex Sanfilippo, who's been on our show before and who is a partner that we do a lot of work with through their PodMatch program, which we love. And Alex did some research and he calls them actively established podcasts for those that are reached kind of like that good milestone of 25 episodes or more. And they post every single week and they're really consistent. And the pod faders, right? And so he did about 1,000 podcast host research program where he did that. Now there were about 100 only of the actively established. Most of them ended up in the pod fade realm, and which is not unusual to 90 to 10%. That is pretty common out there for a lot of companies. And it just so happened that the people who participated in the research were only about 10% of them were active. But between the two sides of them, he came up with a list of things that were overlapping. And what some of the biggest problems with staying organized, keeping organized, self-discipline, accountability were actually two of the items on both sides as to why they quit or why that are critical to keeping going. So it works on both sides. So that's why we've grouped these together. It's because of his research. And we'll link to that and share that with you for those of you who are listening to the podcast after the fact. It'll be in the description. And for those of you who are in Zoom with us right now on our coaching side, you're seeing it already. But that is really the key factors to how to focus and get going and keep going with podcasting. And so I found that these two things go hand in hand, self-discipline and accountability. And I am obviously that piece in our partnership, in our co-hosting partnership. And I'm going to say that is that co-hosting may be necessary for some of you. So I'm going to throw that out there. It is a necessary for Tom.
You're saying it is necessary, or
It
is
is
not necessary?
necessary for you. It is when you have to do a solo show, it is not, you have trouble getting it started, staying accountable, doing that. When you have a co-host or you have a partner in the preparation side of things, you have some kind of accountability partner, it makes all the difference for you.
It does. That for me, it's the accountability piece, right? That I need to show up to stay in integrity for my co-host or the other person I'm involved with. And that can also happen with a guest, though, I think, too. When you have an appointment with a guest, that's an accountability piece that, makes you show up and do it, right?
But in our system and in our process, you would never go seeking those guests. You wouldn't make the time for that if I didn't already do that on our behalf. And that makes a big difference. The topic preparation, because Feed Your Brand here is almost all topics with an occasional coaching crasher popping in, right? Like Alex did at one point, and we had Angie Lyle, and we've had Fran Asaro, which is one of my favorite ones recently. I've referred to it so many times on YouTube, optimization. So we have those because I handle that and our team handles that. And if we didn't do that, then you wouldn't have something to show up to and be accountable for. But we know that that's critical for you. Now, this weekly coaching call, though, is accountability for you because it's built into our system. So you're going to show up for our clients. There's no way that you're not going to show up and do what you need to do and talk about what you need to talk about. And you're always prepared for that because you're going to show up for our clients. So we created in the system accountability that fits with you.
And it's interesting because I talk with so many podcasters every day in a one-on-one sense. And I will often find some people who don't need that accountability piece to show up get overwhelmed with the idea of, oh my gosh, I have to do this every single week. I don't know that I could do that. Or I have to schedule this and show up at a certain time to be able to do it. That scares off some people. And of course, we support them to set up systems. So no, you can allocate 1 day a month or 2 days a month or one afternoon a month, whatever it is you need to be able to batch record episodes. And that's one thing they do 1 day a month and not something they have to, work into their schedule every single week. And then there are the people that would not do it if they didn't schedule a time to do it every week. And I will admit, I am more in that camp personally, although when something inspires me and I have the time, sure, I will go record, episodes on my own. I did that for a little series in a completely different subject, but I will admit I started recording those more than a year ago, and I've recorded about a dozen episodes, and I've never turned that into the publishing that series I wanted to. It's not related to podcasting, folks, so you're not missing out on that. It's completely different subject matter of something that I was passionate about. So I recorded them, but then there's that accountability piece of actually
Publishing
getting
them.
it all done and putting it out there for the world, right? So
right. And so that's the way I look at this. Self-discipline is an internal thing and accountability is an external thing. And so if you can look at how do I create internal and external success, what am I going to do in those formats? That's how you're going to stay consistent and constant with podcasting. And you have to figure out what those are for yourself. They could be different. They're very different for me than they are for Tom. So from a self-discipline standpoint, it's fairly easy for me to say, these are the tasks that I have this week and I knock off my list. This is something that I do. However, I don't have enough time in the day. Right. And you may find that as well. And what is the first thing that's going to slip? The thing that isn't outwardly accountable. I don't owe this to a client. I don't owe this to our investment partners, right? Those are the things that are going to come first on my to-do list because they have an external accountability component. So when I create that in my system, then I help myself. And so that's something that we've done internally here is in order to get enough resources and tips into our tip library, because we just record that privately. We don't always do that on the call here. Sometimes we've added it to the call here because it's an easier way for us to make sure it gets recorded. But we have an internal team member make an appointment with Tom and knock them all out He'll show up for that team member because we owe our team. We are accountable to our team. They have a job to do, and we have to be a part of making sure they can get their job done, right? Because we're measuring them and holding them accountable for doing that. So when they show up on our calendar, we sit down, we record those things, we're done, we did our piece of it, and now they can go off and do theirs. So we created an internal accountability piece in that. So maybe that's what you need to do. Have your assistant, have your VA, make an appointment on your calendar and set that up for prepping you, being ready, making the recordings happen right there on the call.
I truly need that for especially doing those tip videos or anything regarding our client portal, updates, going over every little aspect, the analytics. We've created actually quite recently over the course of the summer until now, a lot of new resource videos, which is very similar, I think, to recording solo podcasts, because it's actually just me on there recording them and screen share, demoing. Actually, I have a really cool video set up for it. I really like those videos. They're neat. But yeah, I do need the support in the organizational sense. Okay, what is it we're recording about today? Oh yeah, okay, great. I can do that. Sometimes I have to prepare in advance and make sure I'm really prepared to know what I'm doing. It's not just spur of the moment. But that's important for me. And it's interesting, Tracy. I think the people there, you and I know people have different strengths in how they think and in how they work. And there's sort of 4 real quadrants of that: creative and visionary people, more emotional and heart-centered people, more logistics and organization, and then people that are more numbers, bottom line, black and white, maybe sort of thinking. And there are some people like you that are really strong in all 4 of those. And that's your typical CEOs of companies are really good at that. And then the rest of us can be dominant in 2 or 3 of them, but one is our kryptonite. And this one is my kryptonite. And I will freely admit, I need support or systems in place to be able to do those things that are just not in my nature naturally, right?
And that's what we've come to discover, is that if we can have a support system and a support team, we have both things, because you are you're high integrity showing up for people, including our internal team and especially our client base, right? You would never not show up. I mean, you really have to be unable to speak to not show up.
Really
like that's
ill.
who you are. Yeah, it'd have to be bad. So knowing those things, we actually structured our system around that because it works to get you into the participation, into the process. So that's what you need to do in sort of that self-discipline side of things, is break down the things that are not your strengths. Break down the things that are missing, and break down the things that make it, when you sit down at the microphone and we can get you going, that you're missing, like the pieces that the preparation that you maybe didn't have or need in order to be effective while you're recording. And so this is something that we do when we book our coaching calls here. We have a topic list, but over on that topic list, there's a description, there's a title that starts to link, there's any outside resources that we had. If we have a guest, there's all the information about them is already over there. So the preparation for it means that there's very little time that you need to do before you sit down to this call. You can take 10 to 15 minutes, take a look, preview all of this. It's stuff we probably already know, but we're refreshing our memory as to why this is on our calendar this week and what we're going to talk about. And then we can go through. Tom and I could do a little prep in the pre-call part of it. When you're sitting in the waiting room, that's what we're doing over there. And we're setting and prepping that up. And we're just making sure we're aligned with what we're going to say on the show today. So we've done our prep. We've kind of done it over the course of a month, actually, in little tiny pieces. And our team has supported that and finished them out for us. So it makes us sitting down to hear really effective use of our time. That's goes to that brilliance part, right? We need to show up and be brilliant. We need to not be sitting around agonizing over like, what links am I going to share? And where did this idea come from? And what's, what are my bullet points for what I'm going to speak about today? Like those things we just don't need to do, but we do need to come up with, what is our message? We need to be that, because it needs to be a message that comes from Tom and I authentically to all of you out there, because you're holding us accountable for giving you good advice. So we need to show up in integrity in that. And that means some bit of preparation and some bit of support that's coming from outside. So it's not somebody saying, here's what you should say. That would never work with us. We would never do that.
Right. No. And the reality is it really doesn't take that much time. You're right.
No.
I mean, we have a meeting, I forget how often, to go through the topics, but my experience since this is a show about podcasting and tips and support to help people make progress with their podcast, I meet with so many new podcasters every day. I will often experience something like, oh, that's a really good topic for an upcoming show. And, I'll just put it in the parking lot, save it, add it to the list. We decide where it makes sense, priority wise. And then, it's that, to me, that's the fun part is, part of the fun part is coming
ideation,
up with the topics.
right?
Yeah. Ideation. And then, even though, Tracy, I do think it's easier with a co-host because, or a guest, like you said, to have to be accountable. But even on weeks of this show when you're traveling and unavailable, or I'm traveling, I mean, you recently, not to put too much out there, but you recently had a family member pass away and you couldn't be here for something. I think you actually did show up for the recording. You were just on the road, actually.
I ended up showing up for the recording because I was available, but I had a horrible camera. So everybody, please excuse the last episode. The camera is awful.
But there are times when you can't be here, or I can't be here, and you and I show up solo, but that topic is here. What we want to talk about, and it's not scripted, it's bullet points, it's key, certain key points we want to make, and it's so natural to what we do. And then we show up, and wonderful. It's a great episode on its own as a solo, although the two-person dynamic, I think any podcast host will admit, is really easy for them. Although I did come across someone recently who I think has been doing mostly solo casts for 50 plus episodes or something, and then bringing in more guests is a bit of a shift.
So here's the thing. So Tom and I have a podcast that we do for our investors. How many of you recorded? Do you know?
It's not a whole lot.
2.
It's a limited series. How many have I recorded, or we've recorded? Are you trying to call me out, or are you?
Yeah. So this is what I found is like, we would make appointments to try to do this, and we can't show up for each other. Co-hosting sometimes doesn't work if you're going to show up for each other and you still don't have a mechanism. It doesn't always work, right? And that's what I found is, so I actually have recorded probably at least 10 episodes, which you have never even heard.
Probably true.
For the investors, because I need to put out one a month, and that's my accountability is to those investors. And when I couldn't get you to sit down and record them with me, I just recorded them anyway.
Well, the problem was the time of day to record them. There were
meetings, right?
Got in the way. But when I would record, with for the other show that I was participated in called Purchasing Truth, that we would do with someone outside of our business, I'm actually was the more accountable one of the two of us, just because who that person is. But we picked a time of day that we were both early birds, and we both have no problem waking up early. We would record at 6 a.m. in our local time for an hour. And that was easy for us. And it was also fun and enjoyable for the two of us. But if we hadn't done that, and I was the one who was responsible for taking those episodes and submitting them for production, which is another accountability piece. And I would do that. Although I would admit sometimes I would be a week or two before, and then I would submit like 3 or 4 together.
Right. So our team is frustrated with you.
We were so far ahead, though, that usually wasn't a problem.
Right. So that's really where you're thinking about. It's like, can you be accountable to your spouse? Not always. Can you be accountable to your siblings? Definitely not. Can you be accountable to your kids? I hope so, but sometimes that's hard too, right? It's easy to slip. We just had this like massive meltdown last night because we were too tired to take her to Yogurtland. And so our 9-year-old, you made a promise, Dad, right? This can be hard for us in general. And if it is for you, find somebody else to be your accountability partner. Find out what's working for you. For Tom, that is always an outside. So if I decided that I was going to record my investor podcast with one of my investors on a call, Tom would show up. Like there would be no question about it.
It's
it would
really
happen.
Interesting how context and perspective changes our priorities when it comes to accountability. And look, human beings are not perfect, and I'm the first to admit I'm not one. That's why we put systems and processes in place to help, right? But it's not about lack of desire. It's interesting what it is. And I know we may be sort of getting a little off topic here.
Well, but what the last thing I really want to leave everybody with is when you start to break it down and you understand where it's not working for you. And, if you cancel an appointment, if you say, I'm going to record at this time, and then you don't, really think that through. Why did that happen? Well, it happened because I needed to take a sales call because my clients are more important. Okay. My clients are more important. What if I set up a coaching call in which I record my podcast in? Okay. Now I have something. So when you start to break that down for yourself, you're going to be able to find the accountability pieces that work for you. Or maybe it's the support. It's like, I wanted to record, but I didn't have all the information about the topic, or I didn't have all the information about my guest, and I felt unprepared, and it frustrated me. What do I do about that? Well, we have a whole system. Reach out to us, right? We're here for you. That's what we have. So if it's not in Feed Your Brand, because you're listening to this live and you're not a podetized client, there's a whole tip library available to you. We have a whole process for setting up, getting all the details from your guest in your calendar. So it happens in one fell swoop and the guest does all the work, right? To give you the preparation that you need. So you don't even have to have a support staff do that for you.
That's
so there
the
are
genius
ways
one.
around
That's really the most important one, I think, for any podcaster, is having a good booking calendar link that not only is scheduled for those times that you're willing to be available to do an interview, and it doesn't open up your entire calendar, folks. And hopefully those of you that use a booking calendar know this. You can limit for a certain type of appointment the windows of time that you're available or willing to be available to do it. Doesn't mean you're going to have all them booked up, or you might get them all booked up. So be prepared and be willing to be available during those times. But that's not even the best part. The best part is you have a whole booking form that collects all the things, so you or your staff don't have to chase them down for it later. It's fantastic. And that's something every podcaster really needs. And that's also honestly why our production service exists. I mean, we have really perfected the post-production process. So that, folks, obviously means once you've recorded. A lot of the things Tracy and I are talking about here are really around the one thing that we cannot make our customers do, and that's record.
Right. And so the accountability piece is in the beginning. But another thing is like, look, if you do not have staff, if you do not have the right people, reach out to us. Let us know what you're looking for. We have partners. One of my favorites is Faith and the team over at
Masters in Clarity.
Masters in Clarity. I almost said Clarity Masters, but Masters in Clarity. Thank you for suggesting that. They're fabulous. If you need somebody to sit down and do 10 hours to set up your calendar and get your guest booking in place, they follow our format. They know exactly what it is. They'll do it for you. It'll be done, and it's just out of the way for you. There are people and resources that we can share with you. That's what we want to really make sure that we're here for you. If you have a question, reach out to us. Even if you're not a client, if you're a Feed Your Brand listener, reach out to us. That's what we're here for. If you're following us on LinkedIn and YouTube, put a comment in place. We'll share one of our tips for you. We'll get them out. We'll get you the resources you need. There is no excuse for you not to be able to use the podcasting industry and all the data and information that is out there to your advantage, and help that community provide you the support, the self-discipline, and the accountability ideas that might work for you.
Critically important. It really is what we're here for, whether we're going to break down a very narrow topic and address a little issue or a bigger issue. And this one can sort of snowball because it can go a lot of different ways. The whole accountability piece can be one of many potential things, right?
Right. Well, here's the thing. I cannot stand to be nagged. That will never work. Like, there's people who put accountability partners in place who send you reminders. That drives me crazy. I can't do it. It makes me not want to do something. So you have to understand yourself at the end of the day, what works for you and what doesn't. And set up your system and process and team.
That could be, if you haven't gone through that as an individual to really understand how you think and what you do well and what you don't. And that can be tough to hold up a mirror to yourself and really understand that. But I'll tell you, I've been through it. Tracy's been through it. Incredibly valuable, especially not just as a podcaster, but if in any way you're in business for podcasting, understanding your strengths and your weaknesses. And I know we don't like to think about our weaknesses. What do you mean? I'm not weak, right? I don't want to talk about that. No, it's not a character flaw. It's just really understanding. I'm sure all of you listening to this are brilliant in some way. You need to understand where your brilliance is and where you need some support. And part of that support may be, getting help with, like what we do with our customers, getting help where you record, you upload, and you're done and you don't think about it. But that's post-production. Again, we're talking a lot about some pre-production things here today, and you can get support for that if you need it. And you can even get support for submitting your episode for production. We have some people that need that. I mean, that's available too. And more importantly, where I would need serious support for after the recording is done, social posting.
That is not your strength either, right?
I mean, look, I do engage in social media personally. I do, and I enjoy it, but it's not, I don't really generally post my own podcast. We have somebody that does that for us, and I wouldn't do it on every social platform. I might do it on the one that I really care about and am engaged in.
Which we know is a mistake, because that doesn't necessarily where your clients are. They
Correct.
may not be on the platform you like.
Audience is, right? So a lot of things to consider there.
Yeah. But break it down for yourself. That's the message that we want to have. Break it down for yourself. Start to understand, where are the things falling apart. So when you don't show up to record, when you say you make a plan to record and then you don't, look at that and think that through. Just do a little reflection on that and understand why that happened. And when you get to that deep why, it's going to come to ideas for how to put something in place that can hold you accountable. Put something in place that gives you the prep that you might need, gives you the ability to be more consistent and constant. Because whether it's social media, whether it's podcasting, whether it's YouTube videos, it doesn't matter. Consistency and constancy are the one thing that sets apart those active podcasters who get the most out of it from everyone else.
I agree 100%, Tracy. From someone who is logistically, I would say, challenged is fair. I can tell you, showing up and publishing an episode every single week, at least, and we have some customers that do more than one a week. We even have one podcaster on our platform. This is going to scare all of you, but really it's his full-time endeavor. Literally publishes 3 episodes every single weekday. How about that? Holy mackerel.
3 a day. Wow.
3 a day. But he has a reason. It's a very unusual podcast. This is not a goal. I'm not suggesting this for anybody else. Actually, I would really not suggest it for everybody, but it works for him. And boy, he's got a serious podcast. You talk about wanting to get 500,000 downloads a month or more. I mean, that's one way to do it. Anyway, the point is, whatever your cadence is, and there's not a right or wrong answer to this, although I will say publishing less than a weekly episode makes it very hard to grow and maintain that audience. I think,
and get the return out of investment for your time,
either for your time and to provide real value. People are looking for you to show up weekly for them. They really are. But that is the most important thing. So whatever you need to do to show up consistently, it is super critical. And even if you are logistically challenged, you 100% can do it. Just get the support you need. And we're here as a resource to help you figure out what that might be if you're struggling with that. But
and so speaking of accountability, integrity, and consistency, right? Mm-hmm. We will be here next week for you. You can count on it. In fact, we even show up over the holidays for you. Now we pre-record those messages, but we do show up
that Wednesday when we're live. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we may pre-record that. But honestly, in the past, when we've talked about pre-recording it, we
never do it. We show up live
just to show up live anyway. So I know we want to test that out, because that's a feature some of our customers are, asking about, doing a simu live. And I do think we should experience it, but I'd probably be there live as it's playing to answer things in the comments anyway. So I don't really understand for us what the point would be. I think if it was truly if Christmas Day were a Wednesday and we wanted to show up, then we'd pre-record. But I also don't think anybody would show up live to watch it, or
Yeah,
very
well,
few people would.
anyway, but the point is that's what you can count on from us. That's our accountability to you, our listeners, to our clients who are here live, and to making sure that the podcast industry has resources like us who can show up every single week for you. That's what we're here for. That's why we do Feed Your Brand. So thanks everyone for listening. I appreciate you. Tom appreciates you. And we will be back here next week.
Awesome. Okay. For those of you on the live stream, this is where we end the live. And if you were a customer or a client in any way, from just being a do-it-yourself hoster to a done-for-you client, you'd be able to participate in discussion and